everyone. We're back for another episode of Life Possible with a Disability. And I have Pooja Viswanathan is the founder and CEO of Braze Mobility, and been trying to get Pooja on for like a while, and really due to my own circumstances, it kept getting pushed. But Pooja, welcome to Life Possible.
Thanks so much. It's great finally being here and chatting with you. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, we did our little pre-interview, and it could have been like we could have just gone ahead and hit record because I'm just fascinated by her and her research and the product. And we talked about how it can change people's lives, and kind of what maybe some of the actual like psychological maybe barriers are to a person using power mobility. So you should tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of like your background and what led you to found
Yeah.
Braze
So
Mobility.
I got introduced to this space of assistive technology. I would say as I was completing my undergraduate degree. My undergraduate degree was in computer science, and I was actually doing a program in bioinformatics. So I was always very eager to apply technological skills to kind of human quality of life, and so that's what got me to bioinformatics. And then I realized that I'm maybe a little too impatient for the life sciences. I like to see my work come to fruition within my lifetime and really see impact on human life within my lifetime. So and kudos to those who are in life sciences, but I realized it wasn't for me. And so I ended up very accidentally actually stumbling upon an assistive technology seminar. And it's kind of funny story because the only reason I went there was because I smelled food, which is, I feel like, the story of, of every undergrad student, right? Free food is what we live for. So that's actually how I went in and I explored, and I just was so fascinated. And I think it was, for me, it seemed like such a great fit because I already had the technological background. I was looking to kind of marry it with my interest in, in improving human quality of life. And this just seemed like it was the perfect intersection of those interests. And so essentially I kind of, shifted my focus from bioinformatics to assistive technology. And then one thing led to another. I got introductions to various professors in the space at a couple of different universities, and ended up at the University of Toronto. And it was really interesting because when I kind of interviewed, I guess, for a summer research or internship there, they were working on this project that was called the Smart Wheelchair Project. And the rationale, because this lab was very focused on older adults with dementia, and especially in long-term care settings, they had found that a lot of long-term care residents, especially those with dementia, were often excluded from the use of powered mobility. And so they were looking for ways
Mm-hmm.
to increase safety and independence by using sensor technology, which at the time was really just, I would say, still very early on in its adoption. It's not like today where almost all the cars that we drive already have sensors in them. This was back in the day where it was
Right.
still sort of an add-on, and it was maybe only available for the kind of luxury cars. And so this lab was looking at using
Right.
that similar technology to increase safety for those residents who might not have been able to operate a power wheelchair safely. So that's kind of how I got introduced. And this was very, very much like pioneering work. Like, it was a very at the time, maybe small
Right.
group of researchers in different parts of the world that were working on this problem. And so I took it on as a PhD student. And it was really, really interesting because, when I started it, I looked more at the system itself and developing the technology. And the technology that I was developing was very sophisticated in that it could not only detect obstacles and slow down and stop the chair if the chair detected an obstacle, but it could also figure out where the person was in the environment. So we were using cameras, stereo vision cameras, very much like how we use eyes to
Wow.
kind of locate ourselves. So the system would
Mm-hmm.
record landmarks and be able to tell where the person was relative to their environment, and be able to also guide them if they went off route and things like that. So it was a really, really advanced technology at the time. And after I finished developing the technology, I tested it with long-term care residents with dementia in that sort of long-term care facility. And the results were fascinating
Mm-hmm.
to me because what I found was that when I looked at the quantitative data, it did seem like the system would certainly, have the potential to reduce collisions, especially in a very controlled environment like that. Mind you, the study that I ran was in a very controlled setting, right? So we're not dealing with all these uncontrolled factors that we
I'm
see in the real
sure.
world. And so in that limited control setting, the
Right.
system did what it was supposed to do, and we did see a reduction of collisions. But where things got interesting for me was when I started to delve into the more qualitative aspect of the research. And I was very new to this, so I didn't, I couldn't really go much in depth here. But even just with the limited number of qualitative questions, qualitative style of questioning that I had with the study participants, I found that we were still missing something. So an example was I didn't quite understand how important control was, feeling that sense of control with the study participants,
Right.
and them experiencing that sort of loss of control when the chair was slowing them down or stopping. And so that was really a
Oh,
small peek for me into, oh, there's this whole other aspect that we've just never considered as researchers, because as roboticists, we love to get machines doing things that humans can typically do. But I think what we failed to account
right.
for was that the wheelchair, in a lot of cases, is really an extension of the person's body that's sitting there, unlike a
For sure.
car, right?
Very much.
Where you just kind of sit in, you
Yeah.
go, you
We,
out.
it's a, yeah, it becomes, yeah, we incorporate this into our, um, it may feel very foreign at first, and then it doesn't, like, you haven't incorporated it into your, but after a while, and I do a disability etiquette, um, uh, like seminar speech all the time. And like, if you touch the chair, it's like you're touching our bodies, right? That's how ingrained we become with this piece of equipment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I kind of saw that, but didn't quite know what to do with it, and decided I needed to explore more. And so I finished my PhD. I came back to Toronto. I did my PhD in University of British Columbia, and so came back to Toronto, did my postdoctoral research, and then I decided that I was going to kind of put pause on the development and really explore, really kind of the attitudes and preferences and those sorts of things before I went further, and made any assumptions about what
I
people
love
needed
that.
or wanted. And so I did a study that was perhaps one of the most qualitative type of research that I've seen in this space of smart wheelchairs, because typically what we see around the world are these very quantitative approaches to developing smart wheelchairs.
I think what I just want to ask you if you think that being a scientist and a researcher and a roboticist that's a female has something to do with the fact that, I don't know, you keyed in on a piece that I think that some people in the field, and I mean, I don't want to,
Huh.
but I don't know, maybe I think,
I've never
you
thought of
know,
it that way. Maybe, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah,
maybe, yeah,
I mean,
maybe,
I
yeah,
definitely was more driven in the first place to this problem because of the human aspect and not the machine aspect, right? So maybe you're right. Maybe that is what Wow, that's a cool insight. I didn't think of that. Um,
anyway,
yeah,
just an observation, because I was like, she's got to be. I would think that in your field, that you're in a vast minority of for females, and that you maybe bring something to the table, right? That anyway. So
yeah,
I
no,
just think
that's
that's
cool. I mean, I
interesting.
definitely was the only PhD in robotics in the lab at the time. So, and I was also probably the only PhD student that had a thesis that was so human centered as well. Like, nobody else in my lab, in the robotics lab, had ever had kind of delved so much into like a what would typically be in the human computer interaction labs. Like that's where you would see a lot of the qualitative and
Right.
really usability study type work. You wouldn't typically see that in the robotics, like a very sort of quantitative robotics and computer vision lab. So there were definitely a lot of things that were, I think, anomalies in terms of my dissertation. But I think also, what really helped me after and kind of during this process, because I realized I didn't have the background to actually do qualitative research. I didn't know anything about interviewing and how to do that effectively and how to ensure you weren't bringing your own biases into the conversation. So I actually went into the Department of Social Sciences, and I actually did a course in advanced qualitative interviewing. And that really helped.
Yeah. Being a social worker, yeah, that's my background. And so it's, I was just thinking that too, like interviewing skills, those are something that in the social sciences we are pretty good
Yeah,
at.
and
Yeah.
it really it did make me far more cognizant of biases, and making sure I was asking those open-ended questions, and really active listening. And it's crazy because I don't I it's nuts that this isn't taught in school. That I had to go and take a
Right.
course
Right.
just to learn these skills, because if you think about it, active listening and empathy are such critical skills that you need to know on a day-to-day basis.
Every,
Yeah.
everything we do.
So that
Yeah.
was really interesting. And then now that I kind of went back and with that new training, and I guess with that new lens, I did a study that was published, and we really looked more at the attitudes and preferences, and those sorts of things. And what we found was that, once again, we found that the control was a really, really important element. And um, and there were other issues with it too. So, not just people's preference to stay in control, but also what happens when you have a system that is taking control. So you start to see things like complacency. You start seeing, there was one study participant who, when the chair would go into sort of autonomous control mode where it would sort of drive itself, she would just fall asleep, and she'd be like, "Oh, time to go to sleep."
Yeah.
Fall asleep. And so,
You
yeah,
have,
so we would
wow.
see.
You have to keep the person engaged, right? Like in the, or wow, that's interesting. And then that makes you think about all these self-driving cars, like how many people are going to be
and
falling
and these are
asleep in
things that
the
are
car.
being explored now in the automotive industry. I think we don't really realize, um, the even though this technology has been out for a while now, there still hasn't been a whole lot of evidence and research around how people are actually using these sorts of technologies, even in the automotive industry. Like, we are just starting to see now
Mm-hmm.
reports of, and I don't know if you're familiar with this term, but there's this phrase called phantom braking, which is when these
Yeah.
cars that have these built-in sensors that do automated emergency braking, where they automatically slow down and stop. So the issue is that sometimes,
Right. Right.
sensors, which are not by any means perfect, and they often will have false positives. If the sensor thinks that there's something
Yeah.
on the street, on the highway, it can spontaneously start
Ugh.
engaging the brakes.
Stop you, and when you're, yeah, when you don't
And
want
so
it
this
to
has been a
happen.
huge
Yeah.
issue. In fact, there's been a
Wow.
ton of reports, and I know Tesla is still kind of having to respond to this, because there have been so many claims made by Tesla drivers that have said, that they've experienced phantom
Mhm.
braking
I got rear-ended because it stopped for
right in the
no
middle.
reason, and
Yeah,
then yeah,
and
caused
so
an accident.
we're
Wow.
still really, although it seems like we're really out, way ahead. We still have, the regulatory side of things and the safety side of things still need to catch up. Like, we've seen an explosion of this technology,
Yeah.
and we haven't really seen a lot of scientific evidence behind it. And so, so then bringing that back to complex rehab, we need to learn from that, right? We need to be very, very careful,
Mhm.
because you think about even something like phantom braking. If I were to take that technology that I had developed in the lab and put it on someone's chair, and they were crossing a street, and the sensors thought there was something there,
Yeah.
as it is,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
can be challenging sometimes to
Yeah.
cross an intersection because the traffic lights change so quickly.
Well, I was thinking about that. Like, well, we have like once you've been driving anything, whether it's a wheelchair or a car, but like I've got my timing down. Like I know when the car is coming, how much time it's going to take me to make the turn. If I stop in the middle of the turn and I didn't calculate for all this extra time, right, for maybe the person to avoid me, yeah, that could be disastrous.
Yeah,
That's
so
interesting.
that was really interesting, and we commented on a lot of those things in the paper, and that's really when I felt like, okay, there's some problems to be solved. I don't feel like we're approaching it the right way. I think I need to take a major step back and just kind of almost start from scratch, like throw all my assumptions out the door.
Right.
And so I went out and decided that I was also going to approach this from outside of academia, because I also felt somewhat constrained with the kind of resources that I had in academia. And so, I sort of
Mhm.
left and started Braze Mobility, and then went out and started actually talking to wheelchair users in the community. So I was no longer only looking at long-term care residents. They were certainly still part of the demographic, but I was also
Right.
going out talking to children, talking to
abilities? Did you
I
start
did.
going to
I did.
abilities
In fact,
expos and
I
things
met
like
some
that?
of my beta customers through the Abilities Toronto. So I went to those shows. I
Mhm.
started talking to people, and the thing that first hit me, because this was the first time I actually entered someone's home who was using a powered wheelchair, and I was immediately shocked at the amount of damage that was in their house, and that was something that I had never seen before, having studied in this field
Mhm.
for over, I know at the time, probably about 12 years. I had never gone to somebody's home, right? Because we usually would get the study participants into the lab. And so I didn't know what their home environment was like. And
Right.
so when I went and saw the damage in their home,
Right.
the dents on the wall, the doorways scratched up, and the paint got, missing, it was like, wow, this is a real issue. And when I started to look at that further and started to really ask again those open ended questions without making any assumptions, it really hit me that spatial awareness is a big issue. And and not just because of the whatever the client's diagnosis might be, but also just because of the design of the wheelchair itself. It's very
Space.
difficult to see behind.
Yeah. And then yeah. And typically homes are, these spaces are small spaces, and you're dealing with,
Yeah.
they're not ADA, right, compliant. They don't have wide hallways or necessarily, you know, regulatory sized doors. So you're trying to, and I mean, accessible housing is near impossible to find. So I'm sure, maneuvering a large power chair that you can't
Yeah.
see around and you can't see the back of in a small space is like nearly impossible, whether you have dementia or you
Exactly.
don't.
And then that's really kind of what was, I think, the big kind of eureka moment for me is really detaching from the diagnosis, right? This wasn't about dementia. It wasn't about, even whether it was muscular dystrophy or whether it was multiple sclerosis. Like it was just, and it was, now thinking back, it was so obvious. Like it was like, how did we miss it? But here I am sitting in an office chair, and if I tried to look behind me and see the floor behind my chair, it's almost impossible. And I don't have any sort of challenges with my upper body, and so I do have dexterity, but that's just
Mhm.
not something that I can do. And so for someone then who's using a wheelchair on a regular basis and navigating those tight spaces, like you're saying, the design of the chair itself doesn't really
Yeah,
allow for that kind of spatial awareness. And then add on to that other accessories that the person
right.
might use, right? So if they say they're using head arrays or sip and puffs or eye gaze where they have to face forwards when they're driving, right? Um,
Right. And then you said
all
like
of that.
oxygen tank on the back of
Extended leg
it. It gives,
rest, right? Where you might not be able to see the end of your feet. The bags that you often have
mhm.
around your chair, right? Because there's nowhere else to put it.
Yeah, carry things.
So
Yeah,
that was, I think, a big,
yeah.
big moment for me where it was like, okay, I think I'm starting to see
And
the
then we
problem
talked
now.
about the, yeah, and then we talked about the bias against
Yeah.
people with dementia because, and again, your product helps everyone, as we've just said. But when you go back to that population, there's a bias that therapists and medical professionals and and I myself as a social worker in a rehab hospital for many years, like I kind of believed them when they were like, well, their dementia prevents them from ever getting like powered mobility. They trial it for like, what, one session, 45 minutes, and they're like, oh, they can't drive power. Well, first of all, it takes a long time to learn to drive a car, and it takes a long time to learn to drive a powered mobility device. But the diagnosis of dementia, like if you have, short-term memory loss and you forgot the date, does not exclude you from the part of the brain that helps you to
Exactly.
learn to maneuver a power
Exactly.
chair,
And
right?
there is, and again, goes back to the evidence, right? There isn't any evidence to suggest that someone with dementia can't drive a power chair. Because again, remember, dementia is it's an umbrella term, right? It really doesn't provide enough
Yeah, yes.
detail on what the person's capabilities are. And there's been very limited research to say, hey, what exactly are the skill sets that someone would need to operate a power wheelchair, and how many of those skills are really affected by whatever diagnosis they have, right?
And I mean, yeah, because it's very different, and it makes me really sad. And you use that word too, like it breaks your heart, like that we made some assumptions about people, and then therefore limited their like life experience. We limited their like quality of life based on a false assumption that has no like data to
Yeah,
back it
I
up.
wonder, and I see this often too. I also think, part of it is I don't think we spend enough time to really ask why. When something is a problem, we don't spend enough time on the why. And this is actually part of design thinking, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the 5 whys, where you ask why enough times, you can kind of get to the root of the
Yeah,
problem.
yeah.
But
Get
if you
down to the
start at,
core.
and we made this
Yeah.
mistake as researchers, right? When we said, oh, safety is an issue, people are being excluded because of safety reasons, we jumped immediately to a solution that would do it for them, that would slow down and stop for them. And it was like, now looking back, because like we jumped to that conclusion so quickly, but when you really look at what might be the reason why somebody might be having accidents, there are so many reasons, like we talked about. What is their spatial awareness? How are they seated? Are they seated in a way that is supporting them? Are they using, do they have motor control issues? And if they do, are they using the right type of alternative drive control, for example, that's matched to their needs? There are so many questions that you need to ask, and there are so many technologies available to support them in depending on what those needs are, that we need to do that before we jump to this conclusion, which I don't know if it comes from maybe an ableist sort of view of if someone's got disability, they immediately kind of tie it to the cognitive functioning and the decision making, where somebody might be perfectly capable of the decision making and the ability to
Yeah.
drive, and it might be something completely else that is actually the issue.
Totally different. Yeah, like I mean, there could be a tremor, there could be like all of these other things, and there could be weakness that they're maybe not aware of. And like you said, alternative drive controls, and then a lot of that can be controlled
Yeah.
in the programming. If someone spends enough time programming the controls, and I mean, you can program in a bit of a delay if that's what's needed, right?
Yeah, and then that's where the blind spot sensor technology comes in as well, right? So now when we're looking at spatial awareness, and that's really what led to the design of this technology, saying, okay, well, how do we empower people? How do we keep people, still fully in control of the operation of their mobility devices? And this includes manual wheelchairs, by the way, because we've also seen manual wheelchair users who have some of those issues with spatial awareness. We're starting to see more and more requests with rollator walker users. I mean, it's getting broader and broader now, because spatial awareness really can be an issue. And so what our product does is it's blind spot sensors, so they're ultrasonic sensors, very similar to those that you have in your car, so they're proximity sensors, and they will detect obstacles around the mobility device, and then offer alerts to the user. And this is done in a multimodal way, so that it accounts for people who might not be able to see visual sort of interface, or might not be able to hear. So we have 3 different modalities: a visual modality, which is through lights, and then we have sound, so that's like a beep, and then we also have vibratory feedback.
Well, show us
Yes,
a little
absolutely.
bit
So
of your
bring
product.
this up here. So here's just a quick demo. I'm just
Wow.
going to turn it off so I can show you all the different components before we get into detail here. So the big sensor system that I'm holding right now is called the Sentina. So the Sentina is a sensor that is typically mounted to the rear of the wheelchair, although there are cases where it can be mounted to the front as well. And it has a 180 degree horizontal coverage and a 45 to 50 degree vertical coverage. So that's kind of what it's seeing around the device where it's mounted. And then we also have the smaller sensor, which is called an echo head. And the echo head sees about 45 to 50 degrees horizontally and vertically. So it's like a cone that it sees. And usually with the echo heads, we'll mount them in the front of the chair, typically pointing forwards and kind of diagonally. So if the client's trying to go through those tight spaces, like we talked about, doorways and elevators, those echo heads can help the client center in those sorts of tight spaces. So we'll typically have 2 of those, and we can also have up to 3 echo heads, so we can have a 3rd echo head. And one of the applications we've seen that is, we've had clients that have mounted that to their headrest, because when they're tilting or reclining, sometimes they don't realize how far they can go before they drill a hole in the wall.
Right.
So that's the echo heads. And then this the other third component here is the controller. So the controller is what provides the visual feedback, and it has the buttons and switches to turn on and off the different modalities and to turn the whole system on. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to press the big power toggle button, and what we'll see is that a blue light comes on. That blue light is what we call the mode indicator. And what it's telling us right now is that the system is on and it's in mode 1. Now, we can think of mode 1 as short range mode, and I'll tell you what that means in just a second. So I'm going to pull back here so that the sensors don't detect anything. And then as I come in here, you'll start to notice some yellow lights turn on as the sensors are seeing my laptop. So here, the yellow light in the center is saying the sensor is detecting my laptop within 2 feet, and so that's the yellow light that's going on. And as I move my hand, I'm going to bring my hand right in front of the sensors. You'll notice red lights come on, and those are following my hand. So that's saying that there's obstacles within 1 foot of the sensor. So we have 1 foot for the red light, and we have 2 feet for the yellow light. So pretty straightforward. And again, going back to now, you're looking at, individuals who might have dementia, maybe a mild to moderate dementia. Using those red and yellow lights are something that they can then recognize because of the traffic lights, right? So that, you can, it's often thought that people with dementia can't learn how to use new devices, but there are so many things that you can do.
Well, I mean, but that's a long-term memory thing that's very well ingrained into their brain and neural pathways anyway, right? So you're just using a technology that they've used their whole entire lives, and that's typically not the problem with the an aging type dementia. So that's really, really cool. And for those of you who are listening and can't see, she's holding this. It's got like on a black piece of probably maybe plastic or metal, and so the sensors are like so she's displaying the larger sensor and then the smaller ones and then the control piece, which will go on different parts of the wheelchair. And
that's right. Yeah. So this is our portable display that we find helpful to kind of show the main features.
Yeah.
But yes, these will all are typically mounted. So the sensors are typically mounted to the rear and the front of the chair, and then the controller is typically mounted close to the joystick or the display that the client is using, so that if they are able to see the visual interface, then that's where it would be. And then that way they're also able to control the different features of the chair as well. So that is the short range mode. And the lights that I was explaining on that bottom row there indicate the obstacles that are seen by the Sentina. Now we also see LEDs at the top of the controller, and those correspond with obstacles in front of the chair. So for example, if this echo head, saw an obstacle, then that would be displayed there on the top. So if I'm the client looking at it, anything on the top row is obstacles in front of me, anything on the bottom row is obstacles behind me. So it's laid out in a fairly intuitive way, and again, the red and yellow lights. So this is mode 1, so which I call the short range mode, where you have the 1 foot and the 2 feet threshold. And then if I hit the toggle button one more time, we now see 2 blue lights that tell us that we're in long range mode. So in long range mode, it's exactly the same as short range, except the distances are now all doubled. So instead of the 1 foot threshold, we have a 2 foot threshold, and instead of the 2 foot threshold, we have a 4 foot threshold. So why would we have this? So we have these 2 modes that people can toggle. You can kind of think of it as like your profile 1 and 2 when you're in a power chair. You might want the short range when you're more in tight spaces like your home, and then you might want the longer range when you're outdoors, when you're grocery shopping, when you're driving a little bit faster, and maybe you want that alert to come up sooner. Maybe if you have delayed reaction time also, you might want to be in the long range mode so that you get those alerts a little bit sooner so that you can respond. And so those are the distances that are default. We are able to program those distances anywhere from a couple of inches all the way out to 6 feet. So there's a pretty big, a huge range in terms of what the sensors can see. So that's the visual feedback. And then we also have auditory feedback. And so in order to activate the auditory feedback, I just press the button on top of the controller. I push it down. And now we've got auditory feedback activated. But we'll see that in when the yellow light comes up, there is not going to be any auditory feedback until I get into that 1 foot zone. And so once we have that red light come up is where we hear that beep. And so the reason we do that, of course, is it can get incredibly annoying if it's just beeping all the time in the yellow and the red sort of zones. And so we just have it come up when that red light comes on that says, "Hey, you're too close," and you heard the beep. Time to stop. So that's the auditory feedback. Sorry, you had a question there?
Oh, I was just wondering. I think that therapists and ATPs and people that are and some customers themselves are going to wonder, like, is this reimbursable?
Yeah, so we've had really great reimbursement success across the country. It is not a coded item; it's a miscellaneous code. So you would use either KO 108 or E1399. And what we have seen is state Medicaid programs cover this. We've seen Office of Voc Rehab, blind rehab state programs, workers' comp, VA. So what we've seen is, I mean, Medicaid, state Medicaid, and we've not only seen kind of the straight Medicaid programs, but also Medicaid managed plans. But there's been really, really great success. In fact, the majority of applications that have been submitted have been approved. And so, we think that maybe it's the timing, maybe people understand, especially because they're more familiar with this technology in cars.
Well, it's a cost savings too. Like if you're damaging the chair, or and so I would think that if they can, to me, like there's an automatic. You're protecting the person, you're protecting the chair, and those are all things that could be quite costly if there's
absolutely. In fact, one of the things that we usually tell ATPs when they ask us, where do you recommend we mount the sensors, is I usually say, just take a walk around this chair and see where the most amount of damage is, and that's probably where you should put the sensors. It's a great way to figure out, because like oftentimes, for example, those front caster, frames, that like those are the ones that get beat up, and so that's a great place where you would put those echo heads, for example. Or if the person's constantly backing up, you'll start to see those scuff marks in the back, and so. It's definitely, damage to the chair is absolutely something that.
And I mean, when I bump something pretty hard with this manual chair, like my body, like the chair stops and my body propels forward. So like it's not just protecting the chair, but like if I fall out of the chair and break a bone, right, I'm going to be in the hospital. So I could see, so many safety features for it. So if so we're getting kind of toward the like 30-minute mark, but I just wanted to make sure that and I'm going to put all this in the show notes as well, but if someone has questions about it, wants to know how to get it, wants a demo, like who do they contact?
So they can go to the website www.brazemobility.com, and all of the information is there. There's the therapist page. If they are interested in a quote or a trial, again, there's a bunch of different ways they can contact us. There's a phone number there. There's a chat. They can live chat with us. They can use the contact us and ask us for a trial or a quote. We are partnered with a lot of the major wheelchair providers, and so we can definitely get a trial arranged. And also, just to point out, there is also the vibratory feedback, and so if the visual or auditory is not sufficient, or they are wanting a third modality, then we do have these vibration modules as well, and you can have 3 of these installed in the left, center, and right of the chair. And so that way, if you're going through a doorway,
so
if you're too close to the
right, you would feel it on your back.
Yes, it can go on the backrest, it can go on the seat cushions, it can go on the armrest. So it's meant to be modular, and that way, wherever the client has sensation is where we can install these. So as long as they don't have any sort of adverse reaction to vibrations, then this is a very popular one, especially with clients that have any sort of vision impairment or legally blind. The vibrations tend to be very popular.
That's very, very, very cool. And that was something that when we first had the conversation, I didn't know, but and didn't think about, right? But so it's pretty inclusive of people with all different types of disabilities, since some of these diagnoses may have more than one, right? There might be visual impairment in addition to other, mobility restrictions. So, Pooja, I know for a lot of people. I know a lot of our ATPs and emotion and therapists, and maybe this is many know about your product, but some don't. And I think all of the different applications are amazing. And I think digging in a little deeper to who are we excluding from powered mobility, that a device like this could they could be it can change their whole life, right? And their ability, because I think, someone stuck in a manual chair with difficulty pushing it, I mean, just really restricts your like quality of life. So thank you for digging in and doing what
Yeah,
you've
thanks so
done.
much for
And
having me. It's really been fun chatting, and we're always just trying to spread more awareness and hopefully also take away a lot of the stigma around accidents because there is often a lot of blame attributed to the driver when in fact there are so many other factors that play a part. And so I think just talking about it more and educating more, hopefully we can help more people be safe and
great.
independent in their wheelchairs.
I mean, I had that belief that, because therapists are the experts, and I think, but they have those built-in biases too, and I think this could open up a lot of possibilities for a lot of people. So, thank you for being my guest, and we'll
Yes,
see you
thanks so
again
much. Chat
soon.
again, Karen.